Hi and welcome back to the course. In this video, we're going to get our code into GitHub because we have to do that before we can deploy it to Heroku. Heroku is going to read the code from GitHub and deploy it and make it available, so we have to get it to GitHub first. So let's do that. What I've done is I've created a new folder for this section's code, and I have copied the code from section 6. Remember, that's our API that has items, stores, and users in models and resources. So a fairly simple API to get started, and then in the final end of course project, which is going to be a larger project, we're also going to work with Heroku and deploy there too. But that's going to be at the very end of the course. For now, let's use the code in section 6 just to learn how to deploy to Heroku. So I've copied the code and I'm going to have a wee look here. And as you can see, I've got app.py, db.py, and security.py. And then we've got the models folder, which has the item, store, and user, and the resources folder, which has item, store, and user too. And they both have an init.py, __ init.py. Now, there's a couple of things that I'm going to add as well. And the first one is going to be a .gitignore. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open Atom in this folder. And it has appeared on the other screen. There we go. So here we have Atom. And the first thing we're going to do is create a new file. And we're going to call it .gitignore. Like that. The contents of this file are patterns which are going to be ignored when it comes to adding them to Git. So what are some things that we'll want to ignore when we add files to Git? What are some things that we don't want to put into Git? Well, for example, something we may not want to put into Git is this .ds_store. This is something that the Mac adds to every folder we access, and we don't want that in Git. So let's put .ds_store there. Okay. Another thing that we may not want in our Git repository is any __pycache __ folders. The pycache folders are essentially just caches of the compiled versions of Python code. Not very necessary. Whenever we run the Python code, these will get created as well, so it doesn't make sense to put them into the Git repository. Something else we won't want is the compiled Python code. So .pyc files. If we put *.pyc, that's going to ignore all of the pyc files. Okay. Okay, let's say that this is all that we want. Let's go back to the terminal. And now we're going to do git init. And that, as you know, initializes the empty Git repository. Okay. Now we've got the Git repository initialized here. We're going to do git status, and that's going to tell us what we are going to be looking at when it comes to adding things to Git. So as you can see, we've got the .gitignore, app.py, db.py, models, resources, and security. If we go back to the gitignore and remove .ds_store, and then we do git status again, notice how the .ds_store file now appears there. That's something that we may want to add to our staging area. But we don't want that, so let's go back and re-add .ds_store. That was just to show you what happens. Okay, another git status reveals that that has now disappeared. And indeed, this is all that we want to add to our Git repository. So what we're going to do is we're going to add everything. Okay, let's look at the git status again. And notice how it's added all of the files except the .gitignore. That is because the .gitignore is what's called a hidden file. It starts with a full stop, with a period. So Git doesn't add it by default, so we have to add that manually. So we're going to do git add .gitignore. And now git status again reveals that we've added all of these, and Git treats them all as new files, even though we know they are not brand new. But this is the first time that Git knows about these files, so it's calling them new files. The next time when we make a change to one of these files, it will say modified as opposed to new file. Okay, now that we've got all of this, we're going to do a git commit. And because we've already added all of the files, Git is going to know that when we commit, we want to put all of these files in a new snapshot, a new commit. -m allows us to write a short message, and we're going to write something like added, or something like first commit added REST API to access items, stores, and user authentication. You'd want your commit messages to have some sort of information as to what is in the code, just so when you go back and look through the commit history, you can see what was added when. Okay, so now we've added that commit, and as you can see, it tells us that it's created all these files, and all is good. We've added 256 lines of code. That is the 256 insertions, which is quite nice. Okay, now we have to add the remote repository. So git remote add origin, and here should go the address of your Git repository. So if you don't have one, go ahead and create a public Git repository for this project. Okay, so we're gonna do that as well. And I'm gonna paste in the address of the repository I've just created. And then we're going to do git push, and then we have to tell it what we want to push. We're going to push the master branch to the origin repository. So we do git push -u origin master, and that's going to push the master branch, which is the branch we're currently on, is the default branch, into the origin remote that we've just added. Now it may ask you for your password, or in my case, because I've got the SSH key already added, it doesn't ask me for anything. Okay, and that is this that has been added. Let's go over to GitHub and verify that everything is there. And indeed, here we are. We've just added the code, and you can see in the remote repository here in GitHub, this has been added. This is going to be public, so you can also use this repository if you prefer. Instead of creating your own, that's totally fine as well. Okay, if you want to get your own version of this repository, you can go into the repository page and then press fork. And that is going to essentially copy the entire repository, but put it into your account. Then you can make changes to it without affecting the original repository, and you can deploy it to Heroku and that sort. Okay, so now that this is here in GitHub, we can put it into Heroku. So I'll see you in the very next video.